They said I stole my brother's inheritance just because I bought a house. But that was never the real story. The truth? It started long before the deed, before the lawsuit, before the whispers. It started when my family decided silence was more useful than honesty, and legacy was just a weapon dressed in love. Why did my parents take me to court over something they told me never existed in the first place? And why? Did it take me this long to see what they'd always planned? It didn't feel like a victory, not the kind people post about. No red ribbon-cutting ceremony, no champagne, no crowd of friends posing outside a freshly painted door. Just me, 34 years old, holding the keys to a house I bought on my own. After years of skipping holidays, turning down road trips, and living in apartments with paper-thin walls and second-hand furniture, I finally had something with my name on it. It was a small 2-bedroom off Maple Street, nestled between 2 older homes with porches that had seen better days. The grass out front was patchy, the paint was peeling from the shutters, and the mailbox tilted slightly to the left. But to me, it looked like independence. I stood in the living room on that first night, watching the light shift across the hardwood floor, still unsure if I had really pulled it off. I had. The papers were signed, the loan approved, the down payment paid entirely from savings I scraped together over more than a decade. No help, no shortcuts. The mailbox had a few flyers and a single plain envelope, no return address, no stamp. Just the words, "Funny how things end up," scribbled in neat cursive on the outside. I read it twice before sliding it back in and locking the door. I told myself it was nothing. Junk, maybe. Just someone messing around. But something about it. It didn't sit right. That night I noticed how the neighbors watched from behind curtains. Not obvious, but noticeable. I waved once to a woman watering her plants 2 houses down. She froze, nodded, and turned away. I chalked it up to small-town habits. People in Lawrence, Kansas weren't known for being overly warm to newcomers. 2 days later, I was on the phone with my mom. I hadn't told her about the house yet. The conversation drifted from weather to work, the usual light check-in, until I dropped it in casually. "I bought a house," I said. There was silence, long enough to make me think the call had dropped. "You bought what?" she asked, voice suddenly sharp. "A house, on Maple Street, nothing fancy." Another pause. Then came the question that changed everything. "What's the address?" I told her. She didn't say congratulations. Didn't ask how I was managing. Just muttered, "I see," and said she had to go. That was the first time the house felt heavy. The next afternoon, I was unpacking boxes when the front door creaked open. I hadn't heard a knock. Standing there, uninvited, was my brother, Lucan. Suit jacket still on, sunglasses pushed to the top of his head, eyes scanning the living room like it was an open house. He didn't say hello. "You know this was supposed to be mine, right?" I blinked, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" He walked in, his shoes clicking across the wood I hadn't even finished sweeping. "This house, Grandpa's house, the one Mom and Dad sold after he died. It's been in the family since the 40s. "I didn't know that," I said honestly. "I didn't even know Grandpa lived here." Lucan scoffed. "You never paid attention." "I found it through a realtor," I said. "It was listed." He didn't respond, just looked around like something sacred had been stolen. And then, just as suddenly, he left. That night I went down into the basement, looking for the breaker box. The previous owner hadn't labeled anything. In the corner behind a stack of old floorboards and a rusted tool bench, I found a crate. Inside it, dusty and covered in cobwebs, was a nameplate. It read, "The Greaves Residence, our last name. My family." I ran my fingers over the engraved letters, dulled by time but unmistakable. It had been removed, deliberately. There were even screw holes on either side. I carried it upstairs and stared at the front door. There, faintly, I could see the outline where the plate had once been. That chill returned. The same one I felt when I read that envelope. I wasn't imagining things. This house wasn't just property. It was history. And apparently, I wasn't supposed to be part of it. At dusk, I stood on the porch, the wind rustling through the overgrown hedges. The house was mine, legally. But emotionally? It felt like I'd walked into a room and interrupted a conversation I was never meant to hear. My phone lit up in my pocket. Incoming call? Dad. I stared at the screen for a moment, then let it go to voicemail. I didn't answer Lucan's call that night. I just let it ring, watching his name glow on the screen, then disappear like nothing had happened. But the truth was, something had happened. Something big enough to make the silence in my chest feel louder than any shouting match could. 2 days later, I got a text from my mother. We'd like to invite you for dinner this Friday, just us, to celebrate your new place. It read like a business memo, not a family message. No exclamation points, no warmth. Still, a part of me wanted to believe maybe they were coming around. Maybe the cold reaction was just shock. Maybe, for once, I hadn't been cast as the outsider. So Friday evening, I put on a button-down. Nothing fancy, just clean and respectful. I drove across town with a bottle of mid-shelf wine tucked under my arm, the kind they used to like, but always called too pricey to waste. I parked on the street in front of their house, took a deep breath, and walked up the same front steps I hadn't used in nearly a year. The door opened before I could knock. My mom stood there in a lavender blouse, hair done, makeup light but meticulous. "Theron," she said, like reading my name off a sheet. She stepped aside to let me in without a hug. Inside, the house smelled like roast chicken and rosemary. The table was already set. Cloth napkins, stemmed glasses, a centerpiece of dried flowers. My dad was at the end of the table, flipping through something on his tablet. He looked up briefly, nodded, then looked back down. We sat. Small talk was, well, small. She asked about the neighborhood. My dad asked about property taxes. I mentioned repainting the guest room, and no one responded. Lucan arrived 20 minutes late, just as my mom was serving dessert. He didn't apologize, didn't explain, just walked in like it was his house. He sat across from me, didn't make eye contact. That's when it happened. My mom reached under the table and pulled out a manila envelope. She slid it toward me like she was passing a napkin. "Just something we thought would simplify things," she said. I didn't touch it. Dad cleared his throat. "You've made quite the achievement, son. We're proud, truly. But this house, it holds weight in this family, history, emotions. A lot of us assumed it would remain in certain hands." I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a drafted transfer deed, from me to Lucan, a legal template, half-filled, unsigned. Lucan still hadn't said a word. I looked up. "You're asking me to give him my house?" "It's just formalizing what was always expected," my dad said. "Expected by who?" My voice didn't shake, but I could feel the heat climbing my spine. Darlene offered a gentle smile. "We'd be happy to take care of those student loans still hanging over you, just to make things easier." I laughed once, short, bitter. "I didn't ask you for help," I said. "I worked overtime, skipped vacations, lived in apartments where the ceiling leaked onto my mattress. I bought that house with my own money, not yours, not his." Lucan finally looked up. "It's not personal," he said flatly. It's just what was always supposed to happen. That was the moment something snapped into focus. I pushed the envelope back toward the center of the table. Then maybe it's time you all reset your expectations. I stood, reached for my coat. Nobody moved. I thought this was dinner, I said at the doorway. But turns out I was just invited to a negotiation I never agreed to. I walked out. I didn't slam the door, didn't yell. But I made sure my steps down the walkway were loud enough to be remembered. Inside my car, the engine clicked on with a low hum. The warmth of the heater hit my face, but I still felt cold. I stared at my phone, tapped the screen. Group chat. Family. I held my finger over the screen for a moment, then tapped delete. As I backed out of the driveway, my phone vibrated again. Incoming call. Lucan. I let it ring. I didn't sleep after that dinner. Not really. I lay there, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow and lazy overhead, letting my mind spiral in the dark. My family hadn't just disapproved of my buying the house. They had plans for it. Quiet, unspoken, but very much alive. And for the first time, I started to wonder what else they never said out loud. What else they never meant for me to have. The morning after, I wandered into the garage. Not for any reason, just habit. There were still boxes I hadn't unpacked from my last move. I opened one marked High School MISC and began digging. Photos, notebooks, a broken calculator, old ribbons from cross-country meets. And at the very bottom, crushed under a binder, was a pale envelope, unopened. It was addressed to me, but in a shaky, unfamiliar handwriting. First Heartland Bank, dated 15 years ago. I held it for a moment, turning it over like it might bite. Then I tore it open. Inside was a quarterly statement for a savings account in my name. Account opened when I was 14. The balance back then? Just over $3,200. My heart kicked once in my chest. I didn't remember this, no one ever told me. The name listed as the original funder was R. Greaves, my grandfather. For a while, I just sat on the garage floor, that single page in my lap. The sunlight coming through the window moved slowly across the concrete. I must have read the balance a dozen times before I finally stood up. It didn't take long to find the nearest branch of First Heartland. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give myself time to back out. The branch manager was an older man named Craig, who looked like he'd been working there since before the internet existed. He listened patiently as I explained what I'd found. After a few keystrokes, he looked up. "The account's closed," he said. "Closed about 15 years ago." I nodded. "Can I see the withdrawal history?" He tilted his head slightly, then stood. "Give me a few minutes." I waited in a side room. When he returned, he had a folder in his hands. He laid it on the table gently, like it was someone's baby photo album. "There were 5 withdrawals," he said. "All between the time you were 15 and 19. I flipped through the pages. Each withdrawal was large, between $500 and $1,000. The last one emptied the account. I paused over the signature line. "Darlene Greaves, my mother." The paper trembled slightly in my hands. "This was legal?" Craig looked uncomfortable. "You were a minor. She was listed as the custodial guardian. She had legal authority." "Even without telling me?" He hesitated. "It wasn't required." I thanked him, politely, and walked out into the sharp Kansas wind. I didn't go straight home. I drove aimlessly for a while, past the park I used to run in, the old middle school building that still looked like it hadn't been touched since the 70s. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and just sat, staring at nothing. So many moments flashed back at once. Me, 16, asking for help with college application fees. Her saying, "Theron, we just don't have it right now." Me, 19, begging for a little help to fix the brakes on my car. Her offering a ride instead, but nothing more. Me, 21, in my third part-time job, still too proud to ask again. All that time, that account, my account, was being drained behind my back. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was the lie of it. The lie of, we can't, when it was really, we won't. The lie of, we love you the same, when they were already investing in Lucan. I remembered her smile when he got his first car. The way Dad announced it like a proud sponsor. He's earned it. I remembered asking for something similar and hearing, you're resourceful. You'll figure it out. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd erased me. I drove home, parked in the driveway, and walked inside. The house felt colder than it should. I dropped the folder on the kitchen counter beside the manila envelope from that dinner. Then I just stood there. In the silence, I said it out loud. Not to anyone, not for drama, but because it needed to be said. They took my name off the balance sheet before I even knew I was in the ledger. I didn't cry. That wasn't how this kind of hurt worked. It didn't come with tears. It came with a stillness that ate from the inside out. Later that night, I wrote a note to myself and taped it inside the cabinet above the fridge. Just one line, scrawled in pen. Not forgotten. Erased. 3 days had passed since I left that bank parking lot. I hadn't told anyone what I'd found in those records, not even Callan. I wasn't ready to say it out loud. But apparently, someone else had found their own way to speak. It started on a Wednesday morning. I opened my phone, as usual, to check a few work emails, and there they were. 2 private messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. One read, "Damn, Theron. Never figured you for that type." Another simply said, "How dare you take what wasn't yours?" I had no idea what they were talking about. Not yet. But the pit in my stomach knew better. I opened Facebook. And there it was, shared over 300 times by the time I found it. A screenshot from a local community group. The post showed a wide-angle photo of my house, not a flattering one. The caption read, "Some people don't know the meaning of family loyalty. They take and claim it's earned." The comments were already rolling in, entitled Millennial Garbage. Parents give and this is how they're treated. He looked smug even from the sidewalk. My throat tightened. I refreshed the page. Another dozen shares. No name was mentioned in the post, but it didn't need to be. Everyone knew whose house it was. That afternoon, I found the source. Lucan had posted a video on both Facebook and LinkedIn. 3 minutes long. Shot with good lighting, clean framing. He was seated in what looked like his office. He spoke in a soft, controlled voice. He talked about family betrayal, about a property with generational ties, and a situation where one brother forgot the meaning of trust. He never said my name. He didn't have to. The comment section made sure of that. Friends, neighbors, even old high school teachers chimed in. "Theron? You serious? That kid always thought he was too good for rules." "Damn shame. Some folks forget where they came from." The longer I watched, the more it felt like my own face was being carved out of the narrative and replaced with someone else's mask. A thief, an opportunist, a liar. I stared at the screen for over an hour, my coffee going cold beside me. By that evening, a friend from college named Mark reached out. "Hey," he texted, "I know this is weird, but the admin of that Facebook group posting the house pic? It's your mom." I didn't respond right away. I had to reread the message twice. He sent a screenshot of the group's info tab. Admin. Darlene Greaves. Turns out she'd created the group years ago for neighborhood safety alerts and school fundraiser updates. It had slowly become a place for complaints, gossip, and now, an attack dog for family propaganda. My own mother had built the platform being used to paint me as the villain. I didn't tell anyone what I'd learned. Not yet. The next morning, I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen counter, and scrolled through every comment, every like, every share. Not a single relative reached out to me, not even a curious cousin asking for my side. The court of public opinion had already banged its gavel. The younger generation just takes. He should be ashamed. Grandpa's rolling in his grave, I bet. All assumptions, all public, and I was still keeping quiet. But something changed that day. I realized silence wasn't protecting me anymore. It was letting them rewrite the whole damn book. So I opened a fresh notebook. I wrote down the timeline of events, from the first text about dinner to the moment I opened that bank folder. I screenshot posts, downloaded Lucan's video, saved every comment I could find. I printed documents, loan approvals, closing dates, paycheck stubs. Not because I was ready to fight that day, but because I knew what was coming. They weren't venting. They were building a narrative. And if I didn't counter it with facts, I'd be buried in it. By early afternoon, I had files spread across the table. My phone was on silent. My laptop had 2 tabs open. One read, Kansas Small Claims Court, process to respond to family suits. The other, how to request official deed records, Douglas County. I didn't feel angry, not in the way I thought I would. What I felt was sharper, focused, like a lens finally snapping into place. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then said it aloud to no one in particular. All right, Lucan, let's get public. The envelope had been sitting on my kitchen counter for almost 2 weeks. I'd walked past it a dozen times a day, moving around it, avoiding its presence like a bruise I didn't want to press. But that morning, something in me shifted. Not out of curiosity, and certainly not because I had any intention of signing it, but because I wanted to know what kind of trap they'd designed in my name. I made a fresh pot of coffee, pulled up a chair, and opened the flap with a butter knife. The pages slid out smoothly, too smoothly. At first glance, it looked official, legally sterile, drafted like every other property document I'd signed during closing. But the language, something was off. I didn't go to Google. I went to Callan. He hadn't been back in Lawrence long, moved back to take care of his father after the stroke. We'd known each other since undergrad, the kind of friend you pick up with no matter how many years you let pass. When I called, he didn't even hesitate. Bring it over. An hour later, I was sitting at his kitchen table, while his mutt, Dakota, snored underfoot. Callan had a yellow legal pad on one side, and the document on the other. His eyes skimmed the pages, and then he leaned back in his chair. This isn't standard, he said. What do you mean? It's not a state-provided transfer template. Look here, this clause is from a commercial deed agreement, and this was edited recently. He clicked his laptop open and inserted the USB I'd brought. A few keystrokes later, a metadata panel appeared on screen. Last edited by W. Greaves, office laptop. I leaned in. You're telling me my father edited this? I'm telling you whoever was on that machine did. And more importantly, this document wasn't created after you bought the house. It was drafted 4 months before you closed. That means it wasn't a reaction. It was a plan. I felt the heat rise, but I didn't speak. Callan continued. They anticipated you'd find the house, maybe even make a move on it. They wrote this up in advance. Dakota let out a groggy snore, and for a second, the absurdity of it all settled in like static. They'd gone to this extent, engineered this quietly, assuming I'd play along. Like I was just a pawn wandering across their chessboard, unaware I'd walked into a checkmate. But this time I saw the board. Later that day, we pulled in a favor. Callan contacted a digital forensics friend from law school who specialized in document trails. someone who could confirm the IP source of the edits. It didn't take long. The signature IP belonged to an account tied to Walter's company-issued laptop. The device had been used from their home Wi-Fi, and worse still, the file name wasn't just a generic title. It was labeled Greaves Transfer 2023 by Phone 3. Version 3, Callan said, so there were at least 2 before this one. We sat in silence for a moment. I always thought Lucan was just favored, I said finally. But this feels like I was never even in the running. Callan looked over. You were raised to lose, Theron. You just didn't. On the way home, I played that sentence over and over. Raised to lose. Flashes came back, Dad filling out Lucan's college forms for him, while I had to ask the high school secretary for help applying to community college. Lucan's first job being handed to him by one of Walter's golf buddies, while I scraped hours at a car wash and nighttime shifts at a 24-hour diner. My whole adult life, I'd chalked it up to being the quiet one, the independent one. But maybe independence wasn't a virtue in our family. Maybe it was a threat. By sunset, I was standing in my dining room with a stack of files, mortgage statements, pay stubs, closing disclosures. I wasn't building a case to win an argument. I was building a firewall. I'd learned the hard way. My silence only gave them time to sharpen their narrative. I typed out a short message, attached the PDF of the forged deed, and copied both Lucan and Walter. If you or any representative contacts me again without legal counsel present, I will file a formal harassment complaint. All future communication must go through my attorney. I didn't sign it, love, Theron. I didn't sign it at all. The response was silence. I gathered the forged document and placed it into a clean folder labeled Evidence. Then I reached for a permanent marker and scrawled something across the front in big black letters. You almost had me. Then I slid it into my drawer, top shelf, front and center. I was sketching out drainage layouts for a school renovation project when the courier walked in. He didn't smile, didn't offer small talk, just held the envelope out like it burned. Mr. Kessler? He asked. I nodded. He placed it in my hand, turned, and left. The envelope was thick, official. Everyone in the office saw it. Nobody said a word. Not even Karen, who usually couldn't help herself when someone got a birthday card, let alone a legal delivery. I walked past the break room, past the copier, all the way out to my truck before I opened it. I sat in the driver's seat and peeled back the flap like it might bite. Inside, a copy of a civil lawsuit filed in Douglas County District Court. Plaintiff. Lucan Greaves. Not Walter. Not Darlene. Lucan. The filing alleged that I had willfully and deceptively purchased a legacy family property using access and trust built through shared familial bonds, and that I was to either relinquish ownership of the house or pay $750,000 in damages for emotional and structural disruption of family expectations. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands were trembling, my knuckles white against the wheel. They were suing me. My brother, through his own firm, was dragging me into court over a house I bought with my own money. It wasn't just a slap. It was a calculated public permanent declaration that I didn't belong. I called Callan before I pulled out of the parking lot. My voice cracked once, maybe twice. He didn't ask questions. Come now, he said. By the time I got to his office, my stomach had twisted into something tight and acidic. He met me at the door, his tie already loosened, a legal pad in one hand. I laid the paperwork in front of him. He read silently, nodding once, jaw tightening. He's going for the angle of trust, Callan said. He wants the court to see this as a betrayal, not a transaction, not financial fraud, emotional fraud, the kind that plays well with juries. I didn't speak. He flipped a few more pages, then stopped. It's filed under his firm, not your parents. That gave me pause. So they're not part of it? Callan's brow furrowed. Not officially. But you know how this works, Theron. If they're not pushing this, they're at least watching from the sidelines with their hands folded. I didn't want to believe it. But silence is complicity, and I hadn't heard from either of them. Not when the video went up. Not when the neighbors started looking at me sideways, and certainly not now. I drove home in the fading afternoon light. Each red light felt longer than the last. I couldn't stop thinking about the courthouse, about what it would be like to stand in front of a judge while my own family called me a thief. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it. The house, my house, felt suddenly too quiet, like it was waiting for me to shatter. I moved through the rooms, aimless. I checked the mailbox, though I already knew it was empty. I stood in the kitchen with a glass of water I didn't drink. I stared at my phone, willing someone, anyone, to call, to say it wasn't true, that it had gotten out of hand. But nothing came. I sat down on the living room floor and stayed there, not crying, just still. My mind buzzed with questions that had no good answers. Would this hurt my job? Would people believe the posts? Would a judge? An hour passed, maybe 2. Eventually I stood, moved to my desk, and made a copy of the lawsuit. I slid it into a folder, then pulled out the original home loan letter I'd kept, still in its white envelope from the bank. I placed them side by side on the dining table. 2 pieces of paper. One that gave me something. One trying to take it away. I took a Sharpie from the drawer and wrote in thick, deliberate strokes across the top of the lawsuit. Greaves vs. Kessler. Then, underneath in smaller print, if they want a war, I'm not showing up unarmed. It started with 5 missed calls and 2 messages. Man, you need to see this. Are you really okay with people thinking you said that? The texts came in before sunrise. I sat on the edge of my bed, the house still wrapped in sleep, and opened Facebook. There it was, a video. 3 minutes long, already posted to 3 different local groups and gaining traction fast. My face wasn't in it, not clearly, but the audio. The words had been cut in a way that twisted everything. I recognized the setting right away, our family dining room from a dinner years ago. The video had been edited to sound like I was bragging, as if I'd said, "Yeah, I knew they'd be pissed, but I did it anyway. I wanted the house. I didn't care how they felt." I had never said that, not even close. It was a chopped-up patchwork of phrases, pulled from separate conversations, stitched together like some Frankenstein version of me. The kind of edit that wasn't accidental. It was built to sting. Within hours, it was everywhere. Shared by coworkers, old classmates, neighbors I'd nodded to, but never really spoken with. Even the church group Mom used to run had the link circulating with the caption, "Some people forget who raised them." I didn't need to scroll the comments, but I did. Typical entitled kid. Thinks hard work means ignoring everyone who helped him. Wow, what a disgrace. Can't imagine doing that to my own family. No wonder he never came to Thanksgiving. They didn't tag me. They didn't need to. That afternoon, I showed the clip to Callan. We sat at his kitchen table, the same place we'd reviewed the forged deed. He hit pause, rewound, played it again. Then he looked at me. This is stitched, chopped, maybe even scripted. Look at this glitch. Between the word wanted and the house, there's a frame skip. Someone cut mid-sentence. I sat back, arms crossed. Lucan? Most likely, or someone he hired. Callan pulled out his phone. Let me reach out to a contact who used to freelance video production. We'll see if we can trace anything. 2 hours later, we got a message from a burner email. The subject line just said, "You don't know me, but I edited that video. I stared at the screen while Callan read the message aloud. You don't know me, but I helped put together the video that's circulating. I thought I was helping a client clarify a messy family situation. I didn't realize I was being used to humiliate someone. After watching how it's being weaponized, I can't sit with it. I'm attaching the metadata files. You'll see the timestamps, raw audio clips, and the original uncut version. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Attached were the files. Clean-cut evidence, the raw audio, untouched, with no sentence ever resembling what that edited clip had made me say. And there, plain as daylight, was the file creation record. Client, L. Greaves. I only asked one thing in reply. Why are you doing this now? The answer came back within minutes. Because I thought he was the one being wronged. But it turns out, he's just the kind of man who tells half a story and lets people believe the rest. I exhaled slowly. Callan leaned forward, already sketching out a legal approach. We don't need to sue for defamation, not yet, but we file this with the court. It undercuts the emotional narrative. It shows manipulation. It shows intent. He paused, looked at me. This won't make you the good guy in their eyes, but it'll make him the liar. I nodded. I'm not trying to win hearts. I'm trying to stop the rot. The next morning, I opened my laptop and pulled up my old YouTube channel. It had 3 subscribers, 2 bots, and an old friend who probably forgot it existed. I uploaded the original uncut clip. I titled it simply, For the Record. No music, no intro, no captions. Just a quiet moment with my real words. Unedited, uninterrupted. I didn't share it with anyone. I didn't post a caption. I just let it exist. The views started trickling in within hours. I went back to work, poured myself a cup of coffee, and whispered to no one in particular. If they're going to drag me through the mud, I'll at least leave footprints. 2 weeks before the court date, I got a message from Aunt Lorraine. It came late in the evening, just as I was shutting off the porch light. No preamble, no emojis, just one sentence. I know you don't want to go, but it's Grandpa's memorial. You should be there. I stared at it for a while. The last time I'd seen most of my extended family, I'd been standing at the center of a rumor mill, painted as the boy who'd stolen a home from his own blood. But this wasn't about the lawsuit. It was about Grandpa. At least, that's what I told myself. The memorial was held at a community hall near the outskirts of town. A modest space with folding chairs, coffee urns, and a slideshow screen set up at the front. I arrived early, hoping to slip in quietly and leave the same way. But from the moment I stepped inside, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Heads turned. Conversations halted. A few people gave tight nods. Most just stared. Some looked away too quickly, pretending they hadn't seen me at all. Darlene stood near the front, deep in conversation with a church elder. She didn't look at me. Walter sat by the side wall, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Lucan? Nowhere in sight. Yet. I found a seat in the back. Lorraine gave me a gentle nod from 2 rows ahead. Her eyes said thank you, but her mouth stayed shut. After the prayer and a few stories about Grandpa's war service and garden hobbies, Walter stepped up to the mic. He started with the right tone, talking about Grandpa's values, his love of hard work, his pride in tradition. But then, like oil slowly seeping into water, the tone shifted. Grandpa believed in legacy, Walter said, voice steady. In trust, in knowing your place and holding it with dignity. People around me stiffened. Some nodded. He paused, then continued. It's easy to forget those values these days. Easy to mistake independence for entitlement. Then Lucan appeared. I don't know when he came in, but suddenly he was standing beside Walter, hands in his pockets, pretending humility. He always said this home would stay in the family, Lucan added, Some people forgot that. That was it. The shot fired without a gun. I stood up. Not loud, not hurried. But I stood. Funny, I said, my voice carrying across the rows. He also told me once that loyalty without honesty is just a leash. A ripple moved through the room. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered. What did he say? Darlene moved toward the mic like she was going to regain control. But Lorraine beat her to it. She walked to the front with a calm I didn't know she had. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up to the mic. A voice played through the speakers. Walter's. Clear. Unmistakable. I don't care what he says. We'll frame it however we need. That house was always for Lucan. Then Darlene's voice followed. He can pretend he earned it, but we both know he's always just scraped by. Gasps. Movement. People shifting in their seats, standing, whispering. The room unraveled like a dropped thread. Walter lunged forward, reaching for Lorraine's phone. Turn that off. That's private. She stepped back. You said it, she said, and he deserves to hear it. So does everyone else. A cousin stormed out. An uncle yelled, Is this what we came here for? Someone from the church group crossed their arms and shook their head. Walter turned to the crowd. This isn't about drama. This is about family. No, I said, still standing. This is about control. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked toward the doors, pushing them open into the cold night air. The sound of chairs scraping the floor followed me out. A minute later, Lorraine stepped outside, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. That recording, she said quietly, was your grandfather's idea. He told me to hold it, just in case. I looked at her. He knew this would happen? She didn't smile. She just nodded. And for the first time since this all started, I believed I wasn't alone. I got home after the memorial, long after dark. I didn't bother turning on any lights. I dropped my keys in the dish by the door and kept walking until I hit the floor in front of the fireplace. No fire, no music, no comfort. Just silence. Thick and heavy, like smoke that wouldn't lift. Everything that had been said during that disaster of a gathering played on repeat in my head. But it was the things left unsaid that haunted me more. The way Walter's voice dropped when he spoke of legacy. The look on Lucan's face, like he was rehearsing a role he'd been cast in since birth. The way Darlene clenched her jaw when Lorraine pressed play. That recording echoed louder than any sermon. Eventually, I fell asleep there on the rug. My neck ached by morning. I woke to light peeking through the blinds, and something tugged at me to move, to go to the garage. I hadn't touched half the boxes in there since I moved in. Most were sealed with yellowing tape and old labels from apartments I barely remembered. But there was one box I didn't recognize. No label, dustier than the rest. At the bottom, beneath some high school yearbooks and a cracked snow globe, was an envelope. My name was written on the front in a cursive I hadn't seen in years. Tight, looping strokes, the kind only one man in my life had ever written with. Grandpa. I sat on the workbench stool, hands trembling as I opened it. The letter inside was dated 5 years earlier. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were sharp enough to cut. Theron, if you're reading this, then they've already made you feel like a stranger. Don't believe them. I've seen how they rewrite the truth to fit their story. The house was never meant for bloodlines. It was meant for builders, for the ones who show up, who do the work, who don't need applause to keep going. That's you. They'll tell you you don't belong, that it was never yours. But I built that porch with my own hands. And when I saw you helping your dad replace that railing at 12 years old without being asked, I knew. You were the one. Tears blurred the ink. But I didn't stop reading. Keep going, even when they try to silence you. They don't know what you're made of. But I do. There was more, but I couldn't keep reading just yet. I pressed the paper to my chest, sat in silence, and let myself breathe. The kind of breath that shakes before it calms you. When I opened the second sheet, I realized it wasn't a continuation of the letter. It was a blueprint, a hand-drawn sketch of a garden. Stone path, 4 raised beds, a bench in the back shaded by a small pergola. I blinked. My eyes scanned the design again. It was my backyard. Not the backyard when I bought the house, the one I had shaped. Slowly, bit by bit, the same layout, the same number of beds, even the same type of curved bench I'd found on clearance and hauled in myself. He had drawn it before I even moved in. Years before. I folded the pages carefully and walked out back, barefoot, my feet hitting the cool grass. The garden was quiet, still half-finished but alive in its own way. The path I'd laid down over weekends curved exactly like the one in the sketch. The bench sat at the end, beneath a wooden trellis I'd built without even knowing why I'd chosen that spot. Maybe I did know. Somewhere deep down. I sat on the bench, letter still in hand, and closed my eyes. Later that afternoon, I called Lorraine. She picked up on the second ring. "I found it," I said. "You found the letter?" "And the sketch." She was quiet a moment before answering. "He used to sit with those drawings for hours. Said it was something that helped him sleep. He never showed anyone else." "Why leave them here?" "Because he knew you'd find them. That's why he told me not to take anything from the house." "Let Theron see it with his own eyes," he said. I didn't know what to say. Gratitude didn't seem big enough. I spent the rest of the day outside, trimming edges, watering plants, moving the bird bath back to the corner Grandpa had marked in the drawing. The sun dipped low behind the fence, casting long golden shadows across the yard. Before heading inside, I placed the letter in a plastic sleeve, tucked it into a waterproof container, and slid it gently beneath the bench. Not to hide it, but to root it. For once, I didn't feel like I'd taken anything from anyone. I felt like I'd been handed something no court could ever argue over. I felt like I came home. The morning of the hearing, the air was too still. Even the courthouse parking lot seemed quieter than usual, like the ground itself knew something was about to shift. I stepped out of Callan's car, briefcase in hand, suit jacket pressed, shoes freshly shined. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I refused to look like the version of me they had painted. Lucan was already inside, flanked by 2 attorneys dressed sharper than him. He wore confidence like a costume, one he had tailored to fit this courtroom. I caught the glance he shot my way. Half amusement, half arrogance. My parents sat behind them, a row back. Darlene clutched her purse with both hands, eyes glued to the floor. Walter stared straight ahead, like a man preparing for battle he thought was beneath him. We were called in. Lucan's attorney spoke first, laying out a story rehearsed to precision. Theron Kessler, youngest son, opportunist, manipulated access to private family knowledge to secure a property with deep, sentimental value. He used proximity, they claimed, to gain advantage over a brother more deserving. They cited emails, family texts, dinner conversations twisted out of context. They showed photos of Grandpa in front of the house from decades ago, used phrases like rightful heir, emotional fraud, and generational betrayal. They called it legacy theft. And to the untrained ear, it sounded believable. Callan didn't flinch. When it was his turn, he stood calmly and began with the basics. Loan approval dates, down payments, appraisals, timelines. But when he reached into the briefcase and pulled out a sealed manila folder, I saw Lucan's smile falter. "We have," Callan said, a notarized will, dated prior to the alleged conversations, retrieved from the safety deposit box of Theron's late uncle, Richard Greaves. The judge leaned forward slightly. Callan continued. This document, previously undisclosed, outlines the wishes of Robert Greaves, the deceased patriarch and prior homeowner of the disputed property. He handed the document to the clerk, who passed it to the bench. The judge opened it and began to read. To the grandchild who acquires this home independently, through effort and not through inheritance, I leave my blessing, for the house is not wealth to be given, but reward to be earned. The room didn't erupt. It cracked. Darlene inhaled sharply. Walter's jaw tightened. Lucan looked down and didn't look back up. The judge read the line twice, out loud. Lucan's lawyer stood, asking for time to review the document. Callan simply said, It's been authenticated. We're prepared to submit full documentation of its chain of custody. It was the loudest silence I'd ever heard. Finally, the judge turned to me. Mr. Kessler, do you have anything to say before I issue a ruling? I stood, looked at all of them. My parents, my brother, the same faces who'd spent months dragging mine through the mud. This was never about the house, I said. It was about who gets to decide who matters in this family, and for too long, I let that be anyone but me. Darlene began to cry. Walter didn't even glance at her. Lucan kept his head down, jaw clenched like it was the only thing holding his pride together. The judge nodded once and began to speak. There is no legal basis for the plaintiff's claims. The defendant acquired the property lawfully, and the plaintiff has provided no credible evidence of fraud, coercion, or intent to deceive. I hereby dismiss the case in full. Gavel. It didn't sound like victory. It sounded like relief. Callan shook my hand once, firm and brief. I gathered the papers, slid them back into my folder, and started to leave. As I passed the row where Walter and Lucan sat, I heard it. You were supposed to win, Walter whispered to Lucan. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. But inside, I smiled. The courthouse was quiet now. No more lawyers whispering strategies in hallways. No more cold stares across wooden benches. The echo of the gavel still lived in my head, but the world outside had moved on. I opened the windows of my house that morning, letting in crisp Kansas air that smelled of cut grass and distant rain. It hit me then. This was mine. The silence, the space, the air, all of it mine again. But silence has its own weight. A strange heaviness settled into my chest. Not sadness exactly, more like the ache of finally breathing after holding it in too long. Lucan hadn't called. He hadn't messaged. Hadn't even liked or deleted any of the posts that were still floating around the internet like flotsam from a shipwreck. Darlene had sent a single text 3 days after the ruling. I hope you're happy now. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Walter didn't reach out at all. Not a word, not a signal. That stung more than I expected. For a while, I kept opening the family group thread, the one I had once deleted and re-added just to see who might still be watching. No one said anything. It was just there, like a ghost in my inbox. I scrolled through old family photos one afternoon, ones I'd saved onto an external drive years ago. Holidays, cookouts, graduations. In most of them, I was off to the side. Smiling, yes, holding plates, helping clean up, taking pictures. But always just out of center. Back then, I told myself I liked it that way. Now I knew better. That distance hadn't been my choice. It had been theirs. Still, I didn't delete the photos. I just archived them. Let them rest in digital silence. The neighborhood noticed the change too. Some neighbors waved a little longer when I passed their houses. Others looked away, unsure whether I'd be bitter, smug, or both. A kid from 2 houses down biked past while I was pulling weeds from the backyard. You really beat your parents in court? He asked, mouth full of grape Sour Patch Kids. I laughed. No, I said. I just stopped letting them define me. He blinked, clearly disappointed with the lack of drama, then rode off to wherever 11-year-olds disappear to in the afternoon. One night, I sat on the couch and let my mind drift back to the courtroom, to that moment when I stood up and spoke for myself, not out of anger, but because I knew no one else ever would. This isn't about a house, I had said, my voice steady. It's about the story they tried to erase me from. And I wrote myself back in. People clapped, some even stood. But none of that mattered as much as the clarity that settled over me in that moment. The truth wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror. And I had finally looked straight into it without flinching. The next morning I wrote a letter to Lucan. Not a long one, just a few lines about what I wished he'd said, about what we might have been if we hadn't been set up to compete since birth. I wrote another one to Darlene, my mother. It was harder to write, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wasn't sure she'd ever read it with anything but her version of me already loaded in her head. I didn't send either. I folded them, sealed them in plain white envelopes, and placed them in a drawer in my bedroom marked, "For when I'm ready." But part of me knew. I might never be. That evening, as the sky turned the color of bruised lavender, I stepped out to the backyard and lit the fire pit. The bench by the garden still stood where I had placed it, weathered now but solid. I sat there, letter in my hand, the one Grandpa had left me, the one that had outlived everyone's manipulation. The wind stirred. The tomatoes swayed. I whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the moment itself. I didn't win a case. I reclaimed a voice. And the fire cracked softly in reply. Spring came late in Lawrence that year, the kind of spring that arrives quietly. No announcement, just the smell of soil softening and the wind dropping its winter edge. My house, the one they once tried to erase me from, stood calm. But inside me, things hadn't settled. It had been 2 weeks since the judge ruled in my favor. 2 weeks without a word from the Greaves side of the family. No emails, no letters, not even a passive-aggressive emoji in an old group thread. The town had mostly moved on. People had their own lives, their own scandals. But for me, the air still held something unfinished. I kept hearing it, snippets from co-workers or neighbors who didn't realize I was nearby. He's the one who sued his own parents, right? That house was stolen, I heard. They didn't mean harm. But lies, even faded ones, stain the surface long after they've dried. One night, I sat at the dining table and opened my laptop. I clicked the bookmarked link, the very same video Lucan had posted all those weeks ago. I watched it again, just like I had the first time. His voice still calm. The script still sharp. Some people take what they never earned. Some people call it independence. I call it betrayal. I didn't flinch this time. I took notes, line by line. I wrote down every sentence, time-stamped every half-truth. Then I opened a new document, stared at the blank page for a moment, and typed in the header, Greaves vs. Kessler, counterclaim response. It wasn't rage that moved my fingers. It was clarity, measured and cold. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. The next morning, I met Callan at his office. He raised an eyebrow when he read the header. You sure about this? He asked. I don't want money, I said. I want it in writing. I want it online. I want it loud enough to undo what they screamed. He leaned back, nodded slowly. All right. We filed the counterclaim under intentional defamation and digital harm. The demand was simple. A public apology video from Lucan and a written retraction from Darlene, posted in the same community group she had once weaponized. 3 days passed. Then my phone rang. Lucan. I stared at the screen, let it ring twice before picking up. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. I didn't even blink. "You brought this to the public. I'm giving you a chance to correct it publicly." "You won! Isn't that enough?" "No," I said. "Winning a case doesn't clear a name. Truth does. So make it right, or we go back to court." He hung up. 3 more days later, a notification lit up my phone. A new video had been uploaded by Lucan Greaves. I watched it once. 2 minutes long. Hollow-eyed, stiff-backed, he mumbled through an apology. "I regret the way things were portrayed. Emotions ran high. Some statements were inaccurate. No ownership. But it existed. That was enough." Darlene followed with a one-line post in the community board. "We regret misrepresenting certain facts." No one liked the post, but I took a screenshot, printed it, placed it inside a folder labeled Resolved. Then I printed Lucan's apology transcript and framed it. The frame sat in my storage closet behind the same door where I'd once kept family albums. A week later, I hosted a barbecue. My house, yes, my house, had always had a yard big enough for it, but never the peace to make it happen. This time, the sun stretched long into the evening. Neighbors brought potato salad, ribs, soda cans clinking in coolers. Laughter spilled over the fence line. Near dusk, I stood on the porch with a beer in hand. Someone tapped my shoulder. It was the teenager from down the street, the same one who asked months ago if I really beat my parents in court. He pointed up. "New sign?" Above the front door, mounted in bronze and oak, gleamed a fresh plaque. "The house that built me." I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "Took me long enough to earn it." He nodded, shrugged, wandered off toward the grill. The breeze picked up, carrying the smell of grilled onions and grass. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was tired, but because the wind finally felt like mine. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't about lawsuits or signatures or even that house. It was about something no one thought I'd ever claim. Sometimes winning doesn't come with cheers or balloons. It comes with silence. Peaceful, earned, heavy silence. Looking back, this story was never really about a house. It was about the invisible lines families draw, and what happens when you finally dare to step over them. If you're watching this, and you've ever been made to feel small for standing your ground, I want to say this. You are not alone. Your voice matters, even when it shakes, especially when it shakes. I learned that speaking up, even when your voice is the only one in the room, can change the entire room. We don't always get the apology we deserve. But sometimes, closure looks like reclaiming your name, your peace, your dignity, on your own terms. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from family just to find yourself? Or maybe you're still in the middle of it. I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're from. Or simply type 1 if this video touched your heart. And if it didn't resonate, I'd still like to know why. Your voice counts too. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got more real stories coming. Raw, honest, and human. Let's keep this conversation going.